Alright, here we are. I finally remembered the video I wanted to watch.
Incredibly unique mechanics, tons of single-player content, and instantly memorable art style, and a fan base that truly does love every nook and cranny of it, and will support the game for years to come. But that's what we covered in part 1 of this retrospective. Yes, folks, this is part 2 of the BlazBlue retrospective, and you might be thinking, well, if you covered all of that in part 1, what's left to talk about in part 2? Oh, right, that. We might want to just go ahead and play that intro, because this is going to be a long one.
Maybe I should watch part 1 first.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Fighting Game Retrospective. And this year has been great for this show. We've covered some iconic franchises and cult classics, but for our final episode of the year, I want to go out with something different. I want to go out with a dash of anime. No, more anime. No, more anime.
JoJo. Oh, oops.
Anime. Slightly less anime. Let's pull it back a bit. There it is. Yes,
So I'm not sure if the mod isn't working or
ever since we
this is as intended.
It's a series loaded with creative mechanics.
I think Dark Army Resurrection is
a game that
once again doing
the
things.
generation of consoles, helped Arc Systems return to the world of fighting games, and has an appeal that goes beyond the FGC itself.
I specifically,
so today, the Wheel of
it's
Fate
Dark
is
Army
turning as we
Resurrection
dive
that made
into
it
the world
so
of
that
beasts, robots, magic, whatever the hell this guy is. And we talk about this series development, the groundbreaking gameplay, and the lore that... Oh god, right. I have to actually explain the story of BlazBlue now, don't I? Is it too late to go back to Wacko Wacko 7?
it's totally going to be worth it. Hey, the Hylian set isn't giving me the set bonus anymore. It'll probably come back at tier 3 though. It's real weird.
Yes, welcome to another episode of the Fighting Game Retrospectives, and folks, I am not kidding when I say this is a big one. And for once, that's not because of some crazy development problem, although believe me, there are going to be a couple of those too. No, on this show, we tackle the behind-the-scenes stories of your favorite fighters. but we also tackle the in-game story. We talk about the characters and the plots of these series, and I have to get this out of the way right now. If you know anything about BlazBlue, it's that this game has the craziest, most complicated story in any video game. Not in any fighting game, games, period. More than Tekken, more than Metal Gear, more than Kingdom Hearts, more than Guilty Gear. I can sum up the plot of Guilty Gear in a tweet.
Mankind knew that they cannot change society. So instead of reflecting on themselves, they blamed the beasts.
Done. Read that while listening to some Queen music, and you're good. The plot of BlazBlue? That was 5% of one game. So I'm sure that some of you tuned in today thinking, oh man, I can't wait to finally learn the plot of BlazBlue. And to you, I have to apologize, because after studying everything that I could, after going through all the story modes and reading all the wikis, I have come to the conclusion that the story of BlazBlue would be too long and too complicated and require far too much explaining to fit in here with the development and the mechanics and everything else that we have to cover. So no, I'm sorry, but we will not be covering the story in this video. That's what part 2 is going to be for. Yes, folks, this is going to be a two-parter. Part 1 will cover the development and gameplay and features of each individual game, as well as giving you a very basic introduction to the characters and story. Then part 2 will be the actual breakdown of the plot. I decided to do this because, as I said, this story is so big and complicated it would make this video a jumbled mess trying to fit everything together. But also because, honestly, I know there are a lot of people out there who just want to know what the hell this story is, and
Maybe
they just want a video only about that. They don't want to sit through me talking about the gameplay, so for those people, I think they'd be much happier just getting their own video. So, if that's you, then make sure that you click that subscribe button so that way you'll know when part 2 comes out. Also, just going to put it out there right now,
we need
we set a goal at the beginning of the year to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we are so close right now. So if you do decide to subscribe, then thank you, I really do appreciate that. But for now, let's talk about BlazBlue's creation. The story of how the BlazBlue universe was born began several years before the first title was even pitched. It was birthed from the dying ashes of another fighter, Guilty Gear. Yes, if you know your anime Air Dashers, then you've probably heard these two compared quite often, and for good reason. Their histories are deeply tied to each other. Guilty Gear was the predominant fighting game franchise for Japanese developer Arc System Works, and while it never sold as much as Street Fighter, or Tekken, or Mortal Kombat, or Darkstalkers, or Star Gladiator, yeah, look up the sales figures on Guilty Gear sometime. Its early games did not do well. But despite those sales, it did have some of the most stylish sprites, quickest combat, and inventive mechanics of any game out there, and it built up a fan base that was fiercely dedicated to it. And I've included myself in there. I've loved Guilty Gear ever since X2. The moment I saw every insane thing this game was capable of, it instantly became one of my favorites. But what does all this have to do with BlazBlue? Well, Guilty Gear was a very personal project for its creator, Daisuke Ishiwatari. He had built up this massive world and long-running story connecting all these games, and you could feel how much he loved these characters. Hell, he even voiced the protagonist of the series. This was his baby. So you can only imagine how much it must have hurt him when he saw his creation taken away from him. You see, Guilty Gear with its sleek graphics and crazy story modes and all the work that went into it cost a lot of money. Money that Arc Systems didn't always have.
It's still storming too. Whatever, I'm just gonna manual save.
The rights to them. And Sammy for years had been trying to merge with Sega, but Sega kept telling them no. Sammy was determined, so they kept waiting, watching for the moment that Sega slipped up. And speaking of Sega slip-ups, the Dreamcast!
Ad.
Ooh.
Watching for the moment that Sega slipped up. And speaking of Sega slip-ups, the Dreamcast! And the Saturn! and the Sega CD. Okay, there were a lot of slip-ups back-to-back. There wasn't exactly one thing that did Sega. And after the fall of the Dreamcast, Sega hit rock bottom, and Sammy was there to take advantage of it. They merged with Sega to create the new Sega Sammy Holdings Company, and gave them all their properties, including Guilty Gear. To which Sega said, thanks. Yeah, Sega really had no interest in making someone else's fighting game. Hell, they barely had any interest in making their own fighting game at the time. And I should clarify, yes, Arc Systems could still technically make a Guilty Gear game, but it wouldn't be the same. Because Arc Systems owned the rights to the characters from the first game, but any character after that now belonged to Sega. So, if they wanted to make a new game, they could include characters like Dizzy, or Eno, or so many other characters who were very important to the story, and Daisuke really cared about that story. So, even though he tried to make a new game that could work around these restrictions, it just wasn't the same. Also, it wasn't a fighting game, and it kinda sucked, so yeah, it had that going against it. Eventually, Arc Systems had to accept that Guilty Gear was gone. Their standout franchise was now the victim of corporate IP shuffling. Daisuke knew that they needed to create something new. They needed to make a fighter that could carry on that game's legacy and bring it into a brand new era. That's when Daisuke got the brilliant idea to step aside and let somebody else take the lead. Yeah, sorry for that mislead, but I had to bring this up right at the start. Over the years, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that BlazBlue was made by the same guy who made Guilty Gear. And while Daisuke did work on the soundtrack for BlazBlue, and he did help provide its credit with the guidance during the initial development, Daisuke Ishiwatari did not create BlazBlue. No, that was Toshimichi Mori, better known by his fan
I just need to. Did I sell any screws? I think I did. Oh my god. The Osaka Amusement Media School to study game design, and fun fact, the reason Mori decided to go to that school in the first place was because of Pop Idol he liked occasionally gave lectures there. And I just find that hilarious. I mean, imagine if the reason that Mortal Kombat came into existence was because Ed Boon and John Tobias went to college together, but they only went to that school because they thought that it would somehow help them meet Debbie Harry. And I can't find out who that idol was, but I really do wonder if she has any idea she's indirectly responsible for an entire universe of games existing. Daisuke would end up bringing Mori onto Arc Systems as an artist, working on Guilty Gear X and other fighters, even creating the fan-favorite characters of Ava and Robokai. But after so many years of working on other people's games, he decided to challenge himself to create his own. He pitched his idea to Minoru Kitaoka, the end founder of Arc Systems, who knew that with Guilty Gear gone, it was time to create a new franchise. But the creation process of the series would be not exactly a difficult road, but a road with many different ideas and voices. Especially when it came to the title. Together, Mori and Kitaoka agreed that the theme of the game should be blue, quite possibly to separate itself from the overly red aesthetic of Guilty Gear. So, with that in mind, the series took on many early names, with the original title being, and I kid you not, Blue Bloods. And speaking as someone who understands English and realizes the connotations of that term in this language, holy crap did we ever dodge a bullet there. I don't think this series would have sold nearly as well if its name implied that it was all about wealthy aristocrats fighting over their inheritance. The name was eventually changed to Riot Blue, which was the title that they planned on sticking with. But apparently at the last hour, and I mean that quite literally, apparently just 2 days before they had to release the first arcade machines, they found out that there might be a copyright issue around Riot Blue, so they had to change it to BlazBlue. And I think I speak for all of us when I say the better name won out. Now, when development began, both Kitaoka and Mori agreed on one thing. The new game would have to be simpler. Kitaoka thought that while Guilty Gear X was great and helped the company make a name for itself, he said that with every update, and boy were there a lot of updates, the game got more niche and the barrier for entry became higher, appealing to a smaller fan base and making it harder for new players to start. So, if this new game was going to be the beginning of a brand new franchise, it would have to be accessible enough to bring in a wider audience. This was a sentiment that Mori agreed with, saying, I thought the Guilty Gear franchise became too difficult as a game. I wanted to simplify a lot of it, kind of reset the fighting game platform. And honestly, this wasn't a bad idea. I know that when it comes to simplifying fighting games to appeal to a wider audience, it's kind of a sore subject for the FGC. I know that most dedicated professional players hate it, but the truth is, sometimes it does help.
I've heard so many dedicated fighting game players say that all you need to bring in new players is cool characters and good visuals, and while that does certainly account for a lot, I can say as someone who exists in that weird blurry world between dedicated and casual players, yeah, I've heard so many other people in my life say they didn't get into fighting games because that barrier for entry was just too high.
Hey, wanna play a fighting game? Not really into fighting games. Yeah, I'll take these on you. Good shot. Oh, let's play. Play again? No, I think I'm good.
Now, I'm not saying you should make complicated fighting games. No, not at all. But if you're making a brand new series for a brand new console generation, and you're hoping to bring in a brand new audience, yeah, making that first game very accessible and then increasing the complexity with each later installment is probably a smart idea. But even though Kiddo Oga and Mori wanted to simplify the game for a wider audience, there was one decision they made that was actually kind of old for time and didn't run the risk of turning away new players. I mentioned this before, but in the 2000s, 2D fighters were kind of dead. If you were making a fighting game, everyone believed it had to be 3D. Who cares if 2D fighting games have their own unique charm and completely different tactics and gameplay? The PS2 and the Xbox era were the age of 3D fighters. So if you're making a fighting game, you better get on board or you're going to be left behind. They both realized that the 2D sprite-based anime aesthetic was one of the defining appeals of their company. It's one of the things that just screams Arc System Works. But even though it was a risk, they weren't going to budge on it. And I'm glad they did, because these sprites look great. This became one of the best looking sprite-based fighters out there. You could go frame by frame and just see how much love and attention went to bringing these characters to life. I mentioned in our Darkstalkers episode how that series would go on to inspire an entire generation of sprite-based anime fighters, and Mori has admitted that Darkstalkers had a huge impact on him. And you can see that in just how lively these sprites are. You can see it in the exaggerated expressions they make in combat. I mean, whenever a character gets electrocuted, they turn into a cartoony skeleton, and that is straight out of Darkstalkers. And speaking of those characters, if you look at this cast, they might feel a little all over the place, and there's a reason for that. You see, while this was Mori's creation, Arc Systems was a tightly knit company. Rather than one person dictating every aspect of a game, instead, everyone was allowed to have a say, including in the character creation. So while Mori did create several characters himself, such as Hakumen, who he had created back in middle school and had been holding on to ever since, many of the other fighters were created by other employees at Arc Systems. For example, the big grappler of the game, Iron Tiger, was made by a self-proclaimed bodybuilding fanatic at the company, and I love that. I can't help but picture some giant muscle-bound dude over at Arc System Works just going around and shoving developers into lockers until they agree to put grapplers in the game. But the important thing is that by having so many voices in the creation process, it made BlazBlue feel kind of all over the place, but I mean that in a good way. You see, sometimes BlazBlue can feel less like a unified world, and more like Anime the Fighting Game. It feels like dozens of characters and ideas taken from all over the place shoved into a single world, but that was kind of its charm. It gave this game a crazy, colorful variety that a lot of other fighters were lacking. Sure, to some people it might have been overwhelming, but to a certain audience, this variety in tones and designs did just right. And this menagerie of ideas extended to the game's story, which... oh, God, the story. Yeah, okay, as I said, I'll be talking about the actual story itself in its own video, but I do need to bring up the inclusion of the story in here because it did play into the game's development. For starters, I mentioned that Toshimichi Mori had been working at Arc Systems on Guilty Gear and some other fighters like Battle Fantasia, and he was a fan of Darkstalkers, but that doesn't mean fighting games were his first love. No, Mori has said multiple times he got into game development because he wanted to make RPGs. He wanted to create a big, sprawling world with massive stories that stretched on for dozens and dozens of hours. He just kind of fell into working on fighting games because he knew Daisuke Ishiwatari, and Daisuke got him to Arc Systems Works. In fact, I've actually heard from multiple people that Mori originally pitched this game to Kiddo Oka as an RPG, but Kiddo Oka wanted them to make another fighting game after losing Guilty Gear, and that's how BlazBlue morphed into a fighting game. Now, I will admit, I haven't been able to find any actual interview where he actually says this, but when you play through the game, yeah, it certainly feels like that's real, because every single BlazBlue game has a massive story mode, longer than anything you had ever seen from another fighting game. And this was back when story modes weren't even a given in fighting games. Nobody was really thinking beyond just having a simple arcade ladder back then. However, while I'm sure that Mori pitched these story modes because he literally had been building up this story in his head since middle school and he wanted to make sure that it got out there into the world in some form or fashion, he did say it was also part of his strategy for selling the game. You see, he wanted to make sure that these games had something beyond just the combat to try and bring in players. In an interview with GamesBeat, Mori said, quote, "Instead of thinking of it as just a fighting game, I wanted to turn it into a single piece of content, an intellectual property. And that way, we could deploy it through many different mediums because we have a lot of cool characters here. Fighting games were still a very niche genre back then, so it really needed to have its own identity where it would be able to translate into multiple media. And translate it did. The story of this game would become a huge selling point that would influence other game movies and would translate into animes and mangas and so much more. Many of which would create their own original content that would then feed back into the main series itself. Again, this was a very forward-thinking approach. Mori went into this project not just playing on creating a game, but a multimedia empire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All the spin-offs and the side stories and the alternate reality tales, and yes, that is actually a thing, would come from much later. Now, it's time to finally delve into where this all began.
Alright, I actually got the battery that I wanted. I actually have no reason to climb this tower anymore, but I'm doing it anyway since... I really should just do it.
Launched in arcades in November 2008 and on home consoles in June 2009. But it was hit with a wave of praise right off the bat. It received some of the highest scores of any fighting game in the 7th gen. In the combat, yes, this game was similar compared to its Guilty Gear brethren, but as I said, that didn't help it appeal to a wider audience. I originally saw this game over at a friend's place, and while I had already been a big Guilty Gear fan, my friend never got into the series. But he was loving BlazBlue, and I can tell you the simpler combat definitely helped get him hooked. He could actually understand what he was doing in this game. And speaking personally, having gone back to this game after playing the most recent installments, it is kind of jarring how different it feels from where this series would end up, but it's still incredibly fun, and it still comes with plenty of its own crazy anime fighter mechanics. Like many games at the time, you had a super meter called the heat gauge, and you could use 50% of that meter to use your supers, called distortion drives. But you also had a barrier gauge, and you could hold down 2 buttons to put up a barrier to prevent chip damage and block attacks that normally couldn't be blocked. But as you did this, you would eat up your barrier gauge, and if that gauge got fully depleted, then you would enter a danger state. And in this state, you would take 50% extra damage. So yeah, big reward, bigger risk. You could also hit every button at once to perform a barrier burst, which would blow your opponent back to give you some breathing room. But it would also completely destroy your barrier gauge, and I already told you why you don't want to do that. So you better think if getting out of your opponent's combo is really worth that gamble. And just like how Guilty Gear became famous for its instant kills, BlazBlue created a similar mechanic with the Astral Heats. However, the instant kills in Guilty Gear were easy to pull off. You just hit all the buttons at once to activate, and then you hit your opponent before the meter runs out. Boom, that's it. Fairly simple for something that let you instantly win the round. But Arc Systems wanted BlazBlue to be... what's the word I'm looking for? Alright, not horrendously broken. So they put a ton of restrictions in here. To pull out these Astral Heats, you would now have to have your heat gauge at max, enough to perform 2 supers. And your opponent would have to have only 20% health left. Meaning, you could probably finish them off with just one of those supers. And you would have to be on match point. And I don't mean that if the match was 1st to 2, then you would have to have 1 win already. No, that makes sense. I mean, if it was 1st to 2, then you would have to have 1 win. And your opponent would also have to have 1 win. Yeah, if you wanted to pull off an Astral Heat, you would have to be the last possible remaining seconds of the last possible round. That is an insanely specific situation, and while I imagine if you ever pulled it off, it would be hype as hell, I can also imagine some people probably playing through this entire game and never even knowing that this was a thing. However, here's something else really weird about the Astral Heat, and by weird, I mean flat out unfair. When this game begins, only 3 out of the 12 characters have their astrals unlocked. All the remaining characters can only unlock their astrals if you beat their arcade mode. Meaning, if you decide to get this game, open it up, and then just plop down on the couch with your friend and instantly start playing against each other, there are 3 characters who just automatically have an advantage over everyone else. Sure, it's a very specific, probably will never pull off advantage, but it's an advantage nonetheless. This might be the only game I have ever heard of where it was purposely broken and you had to unlock the balance patch. And speaking of unbalance, if you already had the character's astral unlocked and you then played through the arcade mode again, you would unlock the unlimited version of that character. These were crazy enhanced Super Saiyan versions of each character that you could only play in offline mode. Which makes sense, it would be way too unfair to take the unlimited characters online. But you and your friends picking 2 unlimited characters and having an over-the-top crazy busted slugfest? Yeah, that's perfectly fine, go nuts. But when talking about the mechanics of BlazBlue, what really made this series stand out was the drive ability. You see, BlazBlue was sort of a 3.5 button fighter. Because you had your 3 basic attacks, A, B, and C, essentially light, medium, and heavy. But then each character had their 4th button, the drive button. And this was a unique ability for every single character with wildly ranging effects. For example, Ragna's drive was a large attack that would recover some of his health. Jin's drive let him freeze his opponent. And Rachel's drive wasn't even an attack. She was a character all about setting up objects and traps to mix up your opponents, so her drive let her control the wind, which could push her and her props around. And just speaking personally, this drive ability is one of the best things about BlazBlue. It provides so much variety to these characters. Each fighting game has a range to what their fighters can do, and to understand the game, you need to understand that range. And the range of abilities in BlazBlue are so wide that I'm sure some people might find it exhausting, but I love it. It made every character feel new, and no matter how many fighters were added to this series, I always got excited to see what they could do. I recorded a lot of footage of these games, and even late into the 4th installment, I still wanted to keep playing and running through the arcade with these characters because it was always a brand new experience. And I've always said that one of the best things about fighting games is that there is a character out there for everyone. No matter what your playstyle is, no matter what your taste may be, you will find that character that is for you. And with the variety in drive abilities and playstyles mixed with the creative cast of characters, BlazBlue is the living embodiment of that mentality. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and talk about these characters. Now, as I said, I'm going to save the big details about the characters for when we actually talk about the story, but I do want to give at least a little bit of rundown on each of them. It means that you do need a little bit of info on what the story is. This series is set in a world where 100 years ago, a giant monster appeared called the Black Beast. It rampaged across the world for years, but eventually 6 heroes appeared to fight back. One of these heroes developed a new type of technology called grimoires, which allowed humans to use an artificial form of magic called Ars Magus. With these 6 heroes and the armies of man now using Ars Magus, humans were able to fight the beast and eventually destroyed it. Unfortunately, when the beast died, it let loose a wave of toxic gas called Seether. To survive this new poison fog spreading across the world, humans had to retreat to the tops of mountains and build brand new cities, known as hierarchical cities. After the war, a new military force known as the Novus Orbis Librarium, aka the NOL, aka the Library, declared they would decide who could and could not use Ars Magus. People rebelled against this, leading to a civil war in the land of Ikarga, resulting in the NOL killing the Ikarga leader and making themselves the police of the entire world. Now, in each hierarchical city, there's an NOL branch, and in the NOL base, there's something known as a cauldron, which serves as a gateway to a dimension between realities known as the Boundary, which is overflowing with Seether. This seems like a very dangerous thing to constantly be tapping into, but since Seether powers the NOL's grimoires, that's why they keep these cauldrons running. But it's also because they believe that at the center of the Boundary is the most concentrated form of Seether imaginable, known as the Azure, which is said to be so powerful that if you got your hands on it, you could reshape reality. So, now that we've got all that established, who are our fighters? Our protagonist is Ragnar the Blood Edge. When he was a boy growing up in an orphanage, his arm was cut off by his brother Jin, his sister was abducted, and his home was burned to the ground. So yeah, he's got a lot of baggage. His life was then saved by Jubei, a talking cat who, despite his size and appearance, was one of the 6 legendary heroes from 100 years ago. Jubei then replaces Ragnar's arm with the Azure Grimoire, said to be one of the strongest grimoires imaginable, with the power to, as you can probably guess, tap into the Azure itself. Ragnar now travels the world trying to bring down the NOL by destroying their cauldron. Next up is Ragnar's rival, his aforementioned brother Jin, who not only joined the NOL, but even killed Ikarga's leader and was hailed as the hero of the Ikarga War. He's a high-ranking officer in the NOL and is always very serious and professional, but he's also a complete a-hole who treats everyone around him like trash, and the moment he hears his brother is headed to the cauldron in the city of Kakatsuchi, he loses his mind, goes AWOL, and becomes obsessed with tracking him down. Working under Jin is the final part in our trio of heroes, Noelle Vermillion. She was an orphan who doesn't remember much about her past, but despite being such a punching bag in the series that's actually kind of pathetic at times.
Give it back, please! Those are important! They're really important to me, so please, give them back! No.
She is incredibly skilled at Ars Magus and even possesses a set of guns that are some of the most powerful grimoires on the planet. Next up, the big grappler of the game, Iron Tager. He's a mountain of a man who's all about business and all about carrying out his missions, and he works for a super scientist named Koganoe, who is part of Sector 7. Sector 7 is a group of scientists who oppose the NOL. I personally love Tager, not just because he comes off as a good dude, but also because he's a grappler whose drive ability allows you to magnetize the opponent and pull them in. Just saying that sentence alone is enough to give some people nightmares.
Why?
There's Shikigami, a ninja from Ikarga, who is trying to help other survivors from that war. He's got a big heart and he cares about everyone, but he's also kind of an idiot at times, and he often gets used as a source of comedy. Carl Clover is a vigilante who hunts down criminals alongside the giant doll that accompanies him, and as I'm sure many of you can guess, he is a puppet fighter who controls his doll with his drive button. He also refers to this doll as his sister, which will be important later. Next is Rachel Alucard, a vampire who, despite her appearance, is actually hundreds of years old and has helped to guide Ragnar in his quest for years, even though her superiority complex frames all of her help through insults. Lychee Fei Ling is a doctor working in Kakatsuchi, the city where the first game takes place, but she has a mysterious history that largely revolves around our next fighter, Arachne. This blob of darkness and insects used to be a scientist working for Sector 7, but he became so obsessed with finding the Azure inside the barrier that he fell inside of it and... well, yeah, this is why you don't want to expose yourself to too much Seether. It tends to make Cronenbergs happen. Then there's Tau Kaka. She's part of a race of cat people called the Kaka clan, and despite being the protector of said clan, she basically acts like a hyperactive kid who just wants to eat. Hakumen was one of the 6 legendary heroes who fought against the Black Beast, and now, for some reason, he is obsessed with the idea of murdering Ragnar. Wow, him and Jin have a whole lot in common. I bet they get along great. He's also one of the more unique fighters in this early game, as he uses his own special meter for all of his moves that slowly builds up on his own, which admittedly can make doing some combos very complicated, but he deals massive damage, so it is worth that work. And lastly, the boss of the game, U-13. She's what's known as a Morokumo unit, a type of android designed to go into the boundary. She's super robotic and emotionless. Unless she's fighting Ragnar, then she becomes an obsessed fangirl. Also, she's made of like 90% knives and swords, and she fights like the most zonery zoner in fighting game history. And that is your roster and premise for BlazBlue Calamity Trigger. Okay, I know that was a lot, but I promise that's about the most story you're going to get in this episode. If you could listen to all of that without your head exploding like that guy from Scanners, then congrats. Yes, folks, this series plot is complicated, and the world of BlazBlue already has a massive wall of lore as soon as the story begins, and about 7 more walls of lore that won't be revealed until later games, even though they start referencing those later walls of lore in the very first game. I mentioned that Mori P started thinking of these characters in this series back in middle school, and this series totally has that vibe of story you thought of 20 years ago and you kept hanging on to it in your head for years before you actually wrote any of it out. To everyone who thinks I'm being too harsh on the story, even Mori himself
I hate
said
how I can
this
relate.
story is a jumbled mess. In an interview with Red Bull in 2017, Mori was asked about his inspiration in creating this story, and he said, and I quote, "Actually, I just created a world combining a lot of things that interest me. Though I admit in hindsight it was probably difficult at times for players to follow along." And speaking as someone who had to figure out this story for this retrospective, I would like to respond to that comment with an overly sarcastic, "No! The hell you say?" But I will make something clear. As crazy complicated and flat out incomprehensive as this story can get at times, it is still totally possible to enjoy these characters without knowing anything about the plot. I had several people talk to me while I was working on this video saying they don't understand the story at all, but they still have a close attachment to these characters because their personalities and their relationships still manage to come through even if you don't understand the basis for it. And I totally get that. I had zero idea what the plot of BlazBlue was until like 2 years ago. But I still really enjoy these characters because these games give them so much personality, whether that be in the actual story mode itself or in the combat. There are so many unique interactions between specific characters when they fight, whether that be unique in-round dialogue between characters or in the intro animations. And I mentioned the unique voice lines, and that's something else that I have to bring up about these characters. The voice acting in Japanese is great. I think the actors each nail their characters, especially Tomokazu Sugita, who plays Ragna and brings a rough, beaten-down anger to that role. But this was one of the first times that I ever heard a Japanese fighting game get not just an English dub, but an actual good English dub. Yeah, at this time, if a Japanese fighting game got an English dub, it was typically pretty bad. But BlazBlue had an all-star cast of some of the biggest dub actors out there, and they each brought their A-game to this. Mela Lee brought this elegance and snobbishness to Rachel that made her seem wise beyond her appearance. Jameson Price gave Tager this stoic, all-business attitude. Billy Sampler, who sadly passed away recently, gave Tao Kaka so much energy and charm. Patrick Sipes as Ragna nailed every over-the-top attack that he had to shout out, and I gotta applaud David Vincent, who probably blew out all of his vocal cords every time that he had to say, "I get to kill you again! Let's kill each other! Ragna! No one else can kill you!" The hero of Ikarga, everybody. Don't get me wrong, I know there are some people out there who still prefer the Japanese track, and that's totally fine. But it's been my experience that the BlazBlue English dub has been one of the most positively received dubs in fighting game history. And I think a lot of that's because
It's
this
the
cast
radishes I want.
understood the assignment. No matter what insane thing they had to say, they gave it their all. Listen, you heard the brief plot synopsis I gave? Well, the full version is about 20 times more complicated with 50 more made-up nouns and verbs. So I guarantee most of this cast didn't know what anything they were saying meant, but they still delivered those lines like they did, and God bless them for that. And they had to record a lot of lines for this because, well, it's time that we finally talk about that story mode. Again, not really in terms of the plot, but in terms of the structure. Because this wasn't just a massive story mode, it was also a very different type of story mode. Every single character has their own story, but those stories can diverge in different ways. You'll be given choices to make which can determine where the story goes, but you can also change your path by losing certain fights or finishing fights with supers. And as a result, each character has around 3 different endings that you can get. And here's the crazy thing. Every single one of these endings contains some bit of information that's going to help you fill in this story. I mentioned the plot of BlazBlue is super thick and hard to comprehend, but I gotta say, playing through each story and getting all the different endings was actually fun because each time that I got an ending, I went, wait, so they said this thing here, and in this character's ending, they said that thing, and those 2 things can mean this 3rd thing. Playing through the story mode gave me that satisfaction of putting a puzzle together when you get those 2 good pieces that finally match up. In fact, you even
seems like too
sometimes
much
get
work.
important bits of information from losing a match. And I don't mean the story-related losses that send you off in a different direction. No, I mean the fights that you're not supposed to lose. Every time that you lose a match, whether you were supposed to or not, you get unique dialogue, and sometimes that can give you another piece of this puzzle. Which brings me to the other reason why I play through this story so many times. Each time that you get one of the endings or you take a new route in the character's story, you'll see the completion percentage go up. And if I see a completion counter going up, it causes my brain to start sparking and I have to see it all the way through. Unfortunately, you don't get 100% by fighting all the fights and getting all the endings. You get 100% by fighting all the fights, getting all the endings, and losing to every single character and seeing their unique loss dialogue. And what do you get for all that work? Well, I'm happy to say there actually is a completion bonus in this game. If you 100% a character's story, then you unlock a short interview with that character's voice actor. That's actually kind of neat.
そうですね。ラグナーして、ゲームの音声以外でも長く喋るとですね。すなわちどういう皆さんわかりますか？
Granted, the interview is with the Japanese voice actor and isn't subtitled, so this really meant nothing to me, but hey, at least it's something. That's more than a lot of other fighting games would do. Now, there is something else to unlock when you play through the story mode, although it's not really a bonus, more of a necessity. If you're playing through the story mode and you're getting confused by the tidal wave of new terms and vaguely referenced history that's being thrown your way, then you will unlock a mode called Teach Me Miss Lychee. This is a feature where the game explains to you what certain terms mean, give you context to the history they keep referencing. It's the kind of thing that a series like this needs. And how they convey all this information? Through sketch comedy, of course. How else would they do it? Yeah, the setup for this is that Lychee and Tao Kaka are meeting other characters who try to teach Tao, but only after you sit through several minutes of them goofing around. Don't get me wrong, there is a charm to this, and hearing the characters actually explain historical events is more effective than just reading it on Wiki. But it was a bit annoying that I went into this wanting to learn what a hierarchical city was, and they would only tell me after sitting through a 5-minute bit about Noelle's friend getting stuck in a tree. Guys, I'm putting a retrospective together over here. I'm on the clock. Let's get a move on it! Now, once you've beaten every character's story mode at least once and gotten one of their endings, then you unlock the true ending. A true ending that leaves off on a massive cliffhanger. A massive cliffhanger that makes pretty much zero sense to you right now, but hey, that just shows how far ahead Mori had planned the story out. I mean, I'll admit, yes, a lot of the stuff you hear in this story mode is going to sound like pure nonsense floating in a word soup, but after playing through every game story and then going back and reviewing this, I gotta admit, so much in this story that sounds like gibberish actually was referencing stuff that would be explained 2 or 3 games later. It's kind of wild how much was said from the start, and even wilder that ArcSys believed in this brand new game enough that they were willing to leave it on a big to be continued. I mean, they didn't know how audiences would react to this. What if it bombed? Well, luckily this brand new venture paid off. I mentioned that the game received very positive reviews, but that doesn't necessarily always translate to sales. I mean, you can have the greatest game on the market, it doesn't mean much if nobody buys it. Well, much to the delight of ArcSys, people did buy it. A lot! In the first 3 years, BlazBlue Calamity Trigger sold 1.7 million copies. Which, if this was Capcom or Bandai Namco, that would be a disappointment. Good thing this was not Capcom or Bandai Namco. No, this was Arc Systems, and for them, this was one of the biggest successes they had ever had. As I said, their Guilty Gear games brought in critical praise and a diehard fan base, but they never brought in much money. And while all the numbers for their games aren't readily available, from what I've been able to tell, it looks like BlazBlue went on to sell more than every version of Guilty Gear X and X2 combined, and trust me, that's a lot of versions. Just to give you an idea of what a big boom this was for ArcSys, the last Guilty Gear game to come out before this was Double X Accent Core. That sold 40,000 copies in Japan in its entire lifespan. BlazBlue Calamity Trigger sold 60,000 copies in Japan in its first month. And these sales can largely be attributed to all the points that I've already laid out. The design, the accessible combat, the story, but quite possibly the biggest boom BlazBlue got came from something that was completely outside of the devs' control, but it's the secret to success for so many titles. It's the thing that can make or break any release. Timing. You remember how I said that was a risk to make this a 2D fighter when it was at a time when studios were leaning heavily into 3D? Well, just a few months before BlazBlue Calamity Trigger released in arcade and on home consoles, Street Fighter IV was released. And while it used 3D models instead of sprites, it was a return to 2D combat. And it exploded. People loved this game, and as a result, 2D fighting games saw a massive surge in popularity. People were demanding more 2D fighters, and studios were ready to jump at this. But it takes time to make a new game.
Alright.
No way would anyone be able to get anything ready for
we're
at
ready.
least another year. BlazBlue had already been in the works and was released just a few months later, making it line up perfectly to take advantage of this new fighting game boom. I'm sure the game still would have sold well no matter when it was released, But yeah, there's no denying that gamers racing to stores suddenly looking for 2D fighters at the exact time that BlazBlue was released probably helped a lot. These rising sales and this sudden surge in the fighting game genre was all ArcSys needed to greenlight a sequel. Continuum Shift released in arcades in November of 2009, exactly 1 year after the last arcade release, and only 5 months after the home console release. This was a hell of a turnaround. How did it slide that fast? Well, that was thanks to the magic of reused assets. Yes, this is one of the things that I really miss in the day and age of sprite-based fighters. The idea that we could get a brand new installment so quickly, we could just pick up the sprites from the last game and put them in the new game. We didn't have to rebuild everything from scratch, making stressful production. It gave the developers much more time to focus on balancing and improving the gameplay, which the developers did. A lot. Every single character got brand new, and more options in combat. This right here, this is one of the best things about BlazBlue. Every single game from this point on would take what the previous game had made and add it onto it. Each game gave characters new moves and mechanics, while rarely, if ever, removing something from them. And when they did, they would typically replace it with something else. Remember how I said if you want to start a brand new franchise, it's not a bad idea to make it accessible to large audiences and then make it more complex with each new installment? Yeah, that starts here. Because of this, it's almost universally agreed upon that this series got better with each installment. You ask someone what's the best Street Fighter, you're gonna get a lot of different answers. You ask someone what's the best Tekken, you're gonna get a lot of different answers. You ask someone what's the best BlazBlue, almost everyone is going to say the fourth one. But that's not to say it's still not worth going back and replaying older games. I still have blast going back and replaying these games, and it was fun seeing how this series developed over time. Now, as for the adjustments to the mechanics, one big one's come from the burst. Now, if you burst, it no longer depletes your gauge. Instead, each player has only one burst that they can use in the match. But if you lose a round, then you can get an extra burst. However, that burst icon isn't just used for defense. You also now need to have a free burst in order to do your astral heat. Yes, there is yet another stipulation to point off your insta-kills. You now can't use your burst throughout the match if you want to make it happen. But they did ease up on a few of the other restrictions. Now you just have to be on point match for yourself, not for both players. And you can now pull off your astral heat when your opponent is at 35% health, which is way better. At 20% health, the insta-kills were just there for bragging rights. 35% actually makes them feel powerful, like something that was worth 100% of your meter. As for the remaining balances and gameplay changes, there's a lot of small tweaks, but the important thing to point out is that the combo system was reworked so that the opponents would be pushed back less, allowing for bigger combos. And yeah, you can totally feel that. The level of crazy combo nuttiness definitely jumped up from the last game. Even someone like me who can barely make his thumbs work could feel the difference. Now when it comes to the characters, as I said, everyone from the last game returned, but there were 3 new characters. Well, more like 2.5 new characters. Tsubaki Yagoi, still on Noel's close friend from the military, has been a childhood friend of Jin and has a not-so-subtle crush on him. She's professional and mature beyond her years, but when Jin goes AWOL looking for Ragnar and Noel disappears looking for Jin, Noel tells Tsubaki that she has to hunt down her 2 friends and kill them. She doesn't want to do it, but she believes Noel is always right and that she should always do duty, so she reluctantly agrees. Well, that she is using an ancient grimoire, kind of devouring her mind. One of my favorite things about doing these retrospectives is that it forces me to play characters I would really never touch. And I never had any interest in playing Tsubaki, but after getting my hands on her, she became one of my favorite characters to play. She's got super easy combos, she's got an overhead that launches you into the air, and she has EX versions of all the moves that are charged up by one back to drive line, giving her some really good variety. There's Lambda 11, who's another Pro unit, who puts out Electro Joy, the mad sassy scientist that Taylor works for. And while she does have her own backstory that's really damn tragic, we all know why she's here. They didn't want to lose any characters, but New 13 was destroyed at the end of the Calamity Trigger, so Lambda 11 is just New 13 with a different coat of paint. And lastly, there's the big villain in the game, Hazma. He was captain of the NOL, and secretly been everyone's strength behind the scenes.
That's a very dangerous weapon for you to be having.
You don't trust a guy who looks like this. Once again, I think the entire English voice cast for this new game, but I have to give particular shout out to Eric Davies, who made Hazma sound like a cross between a schoolyard bully asking if you're gonna cry, and a 1980s Wall Street exec who's coked out of his mind.
Oh, upset? I know I am. It's pretty rough watching someone just fuck up all the things that are important to you and turn them into something horrible right before your eyes. I feel. I do. Oh my God, is this fun for me? Especially your despair. So divine.
After this game, however, Davies would be replaced by Doug Erholtz, but he also did a great job. I seriously didn't even know they changed actors until researching this video. Hazma also serves as the final boss in the arcade ladder, and this is one of the most frustrating fights in this entire series, because not only does Hazma use snake whips to snatch you out of the air and whip and dip and zip all around the stage, but you're not fighting regular Hazma, you're fighting unlimited Hazma. Meaning as soon as the match begins, he surrounds himself with a ring of energy, and as long as that ring stays up, he kills back his life, and if you step inside that ring, you get poisoned and you lose life. If you start attacking, but he keeps blocking, you're just going to end up doing damage to yourself. Oh yeah, Hazma is pure evil in both the story and in combat. He's so evil that he uses insta-kill with pretzel motions, and if SNK has taught me anything, it is that only the most sinister of villains use pretzel motions. However, those are the characters that got added to the arcade release. The next year, in July of 2010, the game came to home consoles. And if you're wondering why it took almost a year for the game to move from the arcade to consoles, it's because remember, when it comes to the combat, there were only technically 2 new characters and a handful of new moves and balance changes. Everything else was reused assets. Console release? That's when the new content started pouring in. Before we go any further, I should let y'all know right now, Continuum Shift gets a little, let's say, Street Fighter 2-y with its releases. There was the initial port, then there was Continuum Shift 2 for the PSP and 3DS, and finally Continuum Shift Extend, which is basically the complete edition, and each game added brand new content. Sticking with the characters, Continuum Shift came to consoles with the same roster as the arcade, plus the brand new unlockable character, Boo12, Okay, at the risk of getting too deep into the plot right now, let's just say she's another Murakumo unit who has some kind of a connection to Noelle, and I won't spoil much more beyond that. She's a very unique character, and her drive places drones all around the stage that you can then manipulate to send out attacks. Also, while Hazma is still the technical final boss of the game, she now serves as the secret final boss. If you manage to get all the way through the arcade without losing any matches, then you get to fight her. But you only have 1 shot to beat her, and yeah, you might need more than 1 shot. She's pretty tough. Now, that was the only new character at launch, but they did release multiple DLC characters. Platinum the Tranny, who is a young girl that looks like a Sailor Scout, but she's actually got 2 souls inside of her. A young shy boy named Senna, and a foul-mouthed troublemaking girl named Luna. Plus a 3rd soul that lives in her staff, Trinity Glassfield, who was another one of the 6 legendary heroes. She's kind of what I would describe as a grab bag character. Her drive lets her summon out random new weapons to use, which can make learning her a little bit difficult since you don't know what you're going to get next, but each of her weapons are goofy and fun, so I'm cool with it. Also, I have to point this out. Platinum's default stage is called Bascule, and this is one of the best stages in the entire game for one simple reason. It's the stage that gave us the Hype Dog. Yes, this big mouth furball is going to constantly be in the background throughout the entire match, cheering you on with his repetitive bark, and I love it. That Mori said that he was a big Darkstalkers fan, and that's it has to be a reference to the cheering dog in Bishamon stage back in the old Darkstalkers game. This has to be
Okay, fighting these guys are not worth it.
Whether or not it's completely original or is inspired by Darkstalkers, the fan base loves Hype Dog. This has become one of the most beloved figures in this entire game. Heck, it's become one of the most beloved figures for art systems in general. People love the Hype Dog.
Don't mess with Cat.
Speaking of dogs, getting back to the characters, Valkenhayn R. Helsing is next. He's Rachel's butler who is fiercely loyal to her, and he's also a werewolf, and his dry button gives him the ability to transform. And guess what? He was also one of the 6 legendary heroes. Yeah, we're starting to fill in that legendary hero bingo card real quick, aren't we? And the final DLC character was Makoto Nanaya, another classmate of Noelle Tsubaki's and a huge fan favorite character. She's perky, energetic, upbeat. She's basically the power of friendship personified. You may also have known she's a squirrel girl because yes, animal people are a thing in this universe, and she punches things incredibly hard. This game was coming out, being the huge comic book fan that I was, I couldn't help but draw very clear comparisons between her and Marvel's unbeatable Squirrel Girl. Marvel vs. Arc System Works, just throwing it out there, make it happen, Daisuke. Her drive ability lets you hit the opponent with 3 different levels of punches depending on how long you hold the button down, and all of her supers are hilariously over the top. They are loaded with so much personality, I love them. Also, I have to point out that Makoto may have the craziest origin story of any character in this roster. Not in terms of
What the actual hell?
No, I mean in terms of development. Nintendo uses 4Gamer. Toshimichi Mori was promoting an upcoming PlayStation manga, The Blooded Experience. Alongside the manga's author, Maki Komao. The interview brought the fact that Komao had written a lot of romances between women in mangas before, and they asked if Mori had any plans on any romance like that in PlayStation. Mori then revealed that originally Tsubaki was going to be a lesbian, but he would get broke with Noelle. But he said he got about halfway through the script and said it just wasn't working out. So he rewrote Tsubaki for now being in love with Jin, but then he looked at Noelle and Tsubaki and said, well, now these two don't have anything in common, why are they even hanging out? So at the last minute, he just sketched up a squirrel girl and threw her in there to basically just be the person who keeps Noelle and Tsubaki talking to each other. I love Makoto, and I'm glad that she exists, but it is wild to think that is how this fan favorite and very important character for the plot came into existence. But looking back on, it's kind of obvious that she was an afterthought. In Calamity Trigger, she's just a goofy ditzy friend to the other heroes, while in Shift Beyond, she's a badass earjack punching machine.
Oh no.
I didn't really have any ideas for her until the second game. But Makoto wasn't the only character who gets some
What am I supposed to do here?
I mentioned that when it comes to the gameplay, this is when BlazBlue really became BlazBlue for me. But that also goes for the characters. In the first game, sure, some characters were here for fun, but most of them were pretty serious. I mean, Ragnar was just every dark bad boy edgelord that you drew in your high school notebook. But starting with Continuum Shift, this series added a much-needed chunk of comedy. Don't get me wrong, there were characters in the last game like Bang and Tao who were definitely meant to be funny. Now, almost everyone had a sense of humor behind him, especially Ragnar. He's now throwing out one-liners and he has a far more relatable I am so done with that voice nonsense attitude about him. In other words, they took Ragnar from generic edgy pro tag and turned him into anime Bruce Campbell. And everyone is okay with that.
Hey, Team Gotti Lolita, wanna include me in the conversation? Well, man, I swear, never seen this little ragamuffin before in my life. I never even thought of that. Once you finally come to your senses, I don't care!
I feel like this was the game that kind of got the tone of BlazBlue, because part of the appeal of this series is that it's a story about souls and gods and life and death and loss and angst and torment. Don't let people realize how weird this is, and they're not afraid to take the piss out of it. And nowhere is that more clear than in the gag endings. Yes, story will return, and we'll delve into that in a moment, but every character now had multiple endings again, including a designated gag ending, and these gag endings are insane in the best way. The story mode will be where you'll be given a choice, and one of those choices will lead you to the gag ending. And these are like 10 to 15 minute long skits that are some of the wackiest things I can imagine, but they are hilarious. Listen, I know the Teach Me Miss Lychee stuff was supposed to be funny, but it never worked on me. Just didn't really enjoy it all that much. These gag endings, on the other hand, almost all of them made me audibly laugh out loud. I had only planned on getting 2 or 3 of them to show off in this video, but then I watched a 15-minute long skit about Ragnar on a ghost ship, and I laughed so hard at I needed to see all of them.
That's right, Captain Jin of the HMS Nirvana, lowly tuna fishing vessel. Captain Ragna did not attack your ship because he was after the Crimson Reward. He panicked because he was afraid of ghosts.
I'm Captain Jim, the lowly to the fishing vessel HMS Nirvana. Rocco just panicked like the little sissy nerd he is when he's not ready for a joke.
Although, speaking of the comedy, I debated whether or not I should address this, but the point of these retrospectives is to give you an accurate summation of the series, so there's no way I could ignore this. When it comes to the comedy of BlazBlue, there is one joke that this series loves returning to over and over again.
Movie lady! Hey you! Boobzilla!
Miss Lychee came to us with her wondrous breasts.
They're not nearly as big and fluffy as they appear! Or did you already fill your flat-chested chick quota for the series? Boobs are the foundation society is built upon. Boobs equal power! Hey, puppeteer mask! Why are all you guys so hung up on back-breaking boobs anyhow?
Ah, would you look at the time? Until next time, magical girls, I bid you adieu.
Yeah, if I had to describe the tone of BlazBlue, I'd say it's one part high fantasy, one part mid-2000s anime.
I thought there was only one joke.
And one part the author's barely disguised fetish. This game loves its boob jokes. Or he loves boobs like the Street Fighter 6 devs love feet. Or he loves boobs so much that when researching this video, I found an interview with YouTube where they actually asked him about how much he thinks of boobs. And rather than trying to downplay it, he proceeded to pull out his tier list and started ranking all the characters in the game. And I'm not judging, it's his game, he can do it here whenever he wants, and hell, I'll admit I laughed at good jokes. But in case you're thinking about checking these games out, yeah, I figured I should probably warn y'all not to play them around Grandma and Grandpa this holiday season. Then again, I don't know your Grandma and Grandpa, maybe they're cool with it, use your best judgment. Now, when it comes to the single-player content, this game introduced a
Oh sure, I'm out of berries.
which first appeared in the PSP Lemming Trigger, but this was its first time appearing on a home console version. This is a really clever mode for your human character. You challenge other fighters across the map, and each time that you beat a group of characters, you then get to pick one of them to join your team. But every time that one of your fighters is KO'd, that's it, they're gone. It's basically the fighting game equivalent of a Nuzlocke, and I think it's brilliant. It's a fairly simple challenge, but deciding what characters you want to join or which characters you might have to sacrifice sending them out there against a big team gives it enough strategy to make it a unique experience. There's so many other games out there that could benefit from something like this. I mean, KOF, you're already a team-based game. This is an easy setup for you. How did BlazBlue beat you to this? Now as for the story mode itself, once again, every single character has their own unique story mode, but luckily, this time to unlock the true ending, you do not need to finish everyone's story, and to get 100%, you don't have to lose all the matches.
Oh, right. You don't have to lose on purpose to get 100% completion. I guess that really pissed people off last time.
No! The hell you say? Sorry. As I was saying, to unlock the true ending, you just have to get the correct ending, Wagner Noel, Rachel Slovaki, Hakumen, and Hazuma, then the true ending only. However, I will repeat, as the correct ending for them. Because, as I mentioned, there are 3 different endings for every single character. The gag ending, as we already talked about, then there is the true canon ending, and then there is essentially the bad ending. And while some of these bad endings are actually pretty cool, you can beat the game if you get them. How do you figure out how to get the correct ending? Well, that would be thanks to the brand new segment, Help Me, Professor Kokonoi. Yes, the Teach Me Miss
What the
Lightning
fuck?
has returned, but so does a brand new segment in the same vein, where Kokonoi will come out and try to vaguely give you hints about how to unlock the true ending. As I said, I wasn't really a big fan of Teach Me Miss Lychee, but I actually dig these Kokonoi segments. They're charming, you've got a few good laughs in here, and they're much shorter and to the point. Plus, Kokonoi is just a fun character. I respect anyone in a crazy sci-fi fantasy setting who's tired of everyone else's nonsense. Now, I mentioned that this game had multiple installments, and each of them did provide something different. First up, Continuum Shift 2 was an update that you could download for the base version, but it was also the version that was released on the PSP and the 3DS. I decided to check it out on the 3DS because around this time every fighting game wanted to make a special version just for the 3DS, but most of them would heavily use the bottom touchscreen, such as Street Fighter, which let you just touch the screen on the bottom in order to do moves. But Continuum Shift 2 is just regular BlazBlue, and it plays about as well as you could possibly imagine BlazBlue running on a 3DS. You could actually do the same combos in here that you could do on the home console, and that's actually kind of impressive. But the biggest thing that I have to give the 3DS version
Okay, time to
is
leave.
the thing that sadly I can't actually show you. It's the 3D, which is shockingly good. BlazBlue already used multiple layers for its backgrounds, so when they put it on the 3DS, they just made it so that when you raise the 3D filter, it separates the layers, and it looks great. Again, I can't actually show you that because it's impossible to capture the 3D effects on the 3DS, but trust me, it's pretty cool. But the big thing that's worth mentioning about Continuum Shift 2 was that all the DLC characters were included as unlockables, and they introduced a brand new mode, Abyss Mode. In this mode, you have to make your way through the hierarchical city of Kakatsuchi, starting at floor 1, and going all the way down to either floor 100, 500, or 999, depending on the difficulty that you set, battling through enemies all the way down. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that you have to fight almost 1,000
I need more
opponents.
fairies.
No, as you fight, you'll see a counter going up, showing what floor you're on, with your performance deciding how quickly you move through it. Then whenever you hit a floor
Okay,
fight,
wow, the
you're
new
transferred
values
to a
make
boss fight against an extra beefy opponent.
definitely
When you
makes
defeat them,
Dark
you get to
Army
pick
Resurrection
random
harder.
buffs. These buffs could be
with
anything
their
from increasing
divine
your stats,
beasts.
or generating your life bar, giving you an extra burst, weakening your opponent. It's kind of nuts how much they gave you to unlock. Then, whenever you try to start a brand new run, you can go to the shop and purchase any of the previous buffs that you already unlocked to start your run with. When I checked this mode out, I thought it was just going to be a fancy version of survival mode. But I was delighted to find that I was wrong. It's not survival mode, it's Hades! This is a roguelike where the point is to see how good of a run you can get by picking up buffs along the way and unlocking ways to improve your future runs, and I got hooked on this. Getting buffs was always such a rush, and thinking of ways to make myself stronger for the next run was so addictive. And I know some people might have problems with the fact that whenever you start a brand new run, if you want to start it with buffs, you have to spend the in-game currency to unlock those buffs. But to me, all that did was just rank up the tension. It put stakes on it. Sure, I could now get these buffs, but if I didn't make it all the way through this ladder this time, that meant I just wasted some of the in-game currency. It's risk and reward, and made every victory so satisfying, and made every defeat just make me want to get right back in there. And I want to point this out for a second. I talk a lot on this channel about the importance of single-player content in your fighting game, but a lot of people hear that and they think, oh, but single-player content is hard. It costs tons of money and time to come up with a big cinematic story mode. And to that I say, then don't do a big cinematic story mode. Use your brain and come up with some unique and interesting single-player modes that use the assets already in the game. And Legion mode and Abyss mode are perfect examples of that. And the Abyss mode carried over to the final version of the game, Continuum Shift Extend. However, for some weird reason, they got rid of Legion mode. I have no idea why you would remove modes from the complete version of your game when they were both available on the previous version of your game. That makes zero sense to me. But they did replace it with a brand new single-player mode called Unlimited Mars, where you face off with super-powered unlimited versions of your opponents. This is the final challenge. It's the mode made just for those who have mastered the game and are the true ultimate warrior. Which I am not. You will not be seeing a lot of Unlimited Mars in this video. My apologies. But the main draw of the Extend version was tons of new story content, including story modes for all the DLC characters, a few side stories,
How do I
and
get out of
even
Zora's
dialogue
domain?
in the pre-existing storylines. That's actually wild that it went back and updated the story that was already in the previous games. But I have to bring this up. You can tell the team on the English side were being pushed hard to get the extra content out on time. Because in Extend, there are tons of problems with the translation and the dub that were not in the base game. You'll see typos, text boxes completely different from what's being said.
God damn it, old man. I know you're trying to hold back that laugh.
Completely blank text boxes.
Wars were created to fight the Black Beast, but we learned plenty of ways that Ars Magna can be used for less military application.
And most bizarre of all, multiple times I encountered the game just switching to the Japanese audio out of nowhere.
As you know, the birth rate of males among the Kakak clan is very low, and the village's population has never exceeded 100. There's no reason to think that will change in the near future.
Bruh. Oh, hey, please give me a teleporter.
I see.
I said these story modes were huge, so the English team being told, hey, guess what? You have to write all of that stuff you just wrote again. Plus extra stuff. Must have just been too much. I can only imagine how hard they were crunching to get this out on time. But there was one more addition making this game the best version of the game. An additional new character, Relius Clover. He's a sociopathic mad scientist who serves as one of the biggest villains in the franchise, and he's obsessed with knowledge and specializes in building puppets and high-tech machines, such as the Murakumo unit. And in case you're wondering, hey, wait, he uses puppets just like Carl. And they even have the same last name. Yes, this is Carl Clover's father. And if you want to know how evil Relius is, well, remember how Carl kept calling his robot partner Sister? Yeah, I'm just gonna let you guys think about that one for a sec. Now, with each game, the sales figures did become a little bit hard to figure out, but looking at the physical sales numbers, it looks like the game sold about as many copies as Calamity Trigger, while costing much less to make thanks to all the reused assets. In other words, this was another hit for Arc System Works. So, they got to work on the next installment, which would be their biggest game yet.
Oh, hey.
In 2023, Kurzgesagt has existed for 10 years. Insanely long in internet years. We're among the largest sciencey channels on YouTube and still a bit of a black box to people. So let's talk about ourselves a bit in 3 parts. Our backstory, how we finance our work, and the values of Kurzgesagt. Let's jump back
I'm gonna
to
go
a
unlock some
innocent
towers,
time.
why not?
From humble beginnings to today. Kurzgesagt's foundation was laid when Philip, our founder, dropped out of high school as a teenager. Learning seemed daft and useless, and he wasn't interested in anything. Until a very special teacher at a school for dropouts grabbed him by the neck. The way she taught was different. She talked about connections and the big picture. She told a story. For the first time ever, Philip wanted to learn more without being forced. It was a key life experience. Kurzgesagt tries to recreate this experience for you. Nothing is boring if you tell a good story, and we try to tell these stories to spark excitement and make you want to go on and learn more. Because of the one teacher who could do this, Philip got a high school degree, studied history and design, and eventually started Kurzgesagt as a passion project inspired by Crash Course World History. In 2012, YouTube was less commercial and more idealistic. You couldn't make a living with videos as involved as ours, and that was fine. The goal was creative freedom, and so for the first few years, it actually cost money to make Kurzgesagt. We had no outside funding, just intrinsic motivation and a few friends from university. We worked for clients during the day, and on Kurzgesagt at night, 80 to 100 hours a week. It was a real struggle, but also very rewarding. But then Patreon launched, sponsorship started, our views increased, YouTube changed. In 2015, the channel began to break even and then to earn a profit. But we were pretty burnt out at this point, so we decided to bring in more friends and hire the first team members full-time, creating a legal entity. More people meant that we could stop overworking, do more, and improve. But we also needed to earn more. The livelihood of real humans depended
okay,
on
there's
it.
still one fairy.
None of us had any experience in running a company. We didn't plan to become big or to grow. It sort of just happened. A decade later, Kurzgesagt is another simple project in war. We are an animation studio with offices in Munich and Berlin. We need computers, monitors, tablets, desks, coffee, contracts, pay licenses, taxes, rent, and insurance. In 2023, our team consists of over 60 employees and a lot of freelancers around the world. Salaries
why
alone
does this increase
cost
to 4?
millions of dollars a year just to stay around. This creates an interesting problem. With such high production costs, how can we publish our work for free? How we finance Kurzgesagt. We've added up our earnings from 2015 through 2022. Our sources of funding change depending on opportunities and the state of the world. Early on, agency work was our main source of income. Ad revenue varies. In some years we got more sponsorships than in others. The The shop didn't exist for a long time, then it became pretty big after we launched our calendar. 62% of our revenue comes indirectly or directly from you. You watch our videos with ads, support us on Patreon, or buy from our shop. The single biggest source of income by far is our shop, that alone accounted for 40% over the last 8 years. The shop started small, but once we published our calendar for the first time in 2016, we realized it could really help us do more things, and we started producing more and more science products, from our posters to our gratitude journal or universe
Why is
candles.
the rubber set so
YouTube
powerful?
ads accounted for 13% and Patreon 9%. It ceased to exist. Our shop and Patreon are our most important sources of revenue, and because we see ourselves as science communicators, we don't just do merch, but sciencey products that we spend hundreds of hours researching, discussing with experts, polishing up.
Let me go to Hateno and try buying better armor.
They are part of the science story we try to tell. It also just feels good to get directly funded by you guys, give you something back for it on top of our videos. YouTube ads are a crucial part of our funding as well, but they are not within our control. Then there's paid agency work, which we stopped doing in 2022. It accounted for 9% of our revenue over the last 8 years. A lot in the beginning, not much by the end. Then there are commercial sponsors advertising products. They accounted for 12% of our revenue. We also got about 7% from German Public Broadcasting for the German channel, but ended this partnership in 2022. Finally, there are institutional sponsors representing about 10%. Some people take issue with this, especially Bill Gates has come under public scrutiny, and we've been criticized for even working with organizations funded by him. So let's look at this 10% in more detail. About 3% of our revenue over the last 8 years came from the Gates organizations for a wide variety of topics, often suggested by us. 5% comes from open philanthropy and is only used for specific projects. With these funds, we've started Arabic, Hindi, Korean, Japanese, Portuguese, and French channels, bringing more free science content to more people. Then there's a 2-year funding for original TikTok content, which gives us freedom to explore and learn how to do short-form science communication. The final 2% came from other organizations like the Red Cross or the UN, for example. We choose institutional sponsors carefully, but if organizations want to fund videos that help us spread quality information about relevant topics, this is an easy yes for us, if we have the capacity for it. On top of that, the institutional sponsors we're working with align with our values. We have contracts with every grant giver or sponsor that bars them from editorial influence, other than suggesting topic areas like global health or climate change. We agree on video topics together, but sponsors can neither influence details nor our conclusions. The final decision always remains with us. And usually we develop the topics of the videos autonomously and tell the sponsor what we're doing afterwards. If you're interested in how we research our videos in detail, our head of research wrote an article about it. Running an educational YouTube channel is a balancing act that we take very seriously. We're doing our best to maintain this balance, adjusting whenever necessary. As a team and a company, we want to grow to give more people access to a science-based outlook.
It's just me or the shield surfing take up more shield durability? That's probably Pyro Rebalance doing its thing to make up for the fact that shields just have more durability instead. I don't know, I feel like they should have just gave you more freedom to shield surf for longer. A lot of people don't want to bother with shield surfing until they get the Hylian shield, because they're afraid of using up their durability.
So our videos are a good simplification of very complicated topics. We want to make people excited about science, so they rediscover subjects they hated in school and see how amazing they are. On top of curiosity, we want to inspire long-term thinking and a positive, constructive outlook. Being optimistic about the future of humanity is not mainstream, and we think this is horrible. Pessimism often sounds smart and gets more views, while optimism can sound naive. But this is a bias that's not helpful for us as a species. So, despite the gloominess of many topics, we want to approach them with informed and well-researched optimism. Not brushing humanity's very real challenges aside, but also not falling into the trap of pessimism. We want to inspire you to dream a little about the glorious future that we could actually build, but only if we believe it's possible. In the long run, we don't only want to do this on YouTube. The idea is for Kotzkazan to be a positive influence across more media. On our TikTok channel, in the long-form content we're exploring, in apps, in the VR game that will be released later this year, and the games we plan to make in the future. Our shop is a central part of this vision. We start our stories with a video and end them with a poster. There are so many things we want to do, and thanks to you watching this right now, we have the freedom to work to the best of our knowledge and ability. In the end, we hope you like what we offer, and that we'll be doing something worthwhile for as long as we exist. And hopefully, we'll have a lasting impact by making science and learning more fun for as many people as possible. If you personally want to help us do this, you can watch and share our videos, check out our shop, become a Patreon, or give us an ad blocker exception. We exist because of you, and you have no idea how much we appreciate that you're here. And hopefully, we're less of a black box now. In any case, doing Kotzkazan for a decade has been a pretty crazy ride. And so, from the whole team, thank you so much for being with us all these years.
Hi. Hey.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Tears of the Kingdom gameplay official. You know what? I'm gonna climb this tower and then I'm gonna end the video. I want to watch it, but at the same time, I want to experience Zelda as blind as possible. I'll probably watch like a minute. And then end it there. Great. What the heck are Sheikah's skills? I'm pretty sure this is typically the first tower people get. I mean, it was certainly my first. It auto-saved. Woof.